Our featured guest tonight is someone whom we would consider Hollywood royalty. She's had more than one star on the Hollywood Walks of Fame, is a gem of the classic television and Western film genres, and has worked with some of the biggest stars to have ever graced the silver screen, from Fred Astaire and Audrey Hepburn to Burt Reynolds, Frank Sinatra, Lucille Ball. She's worked with them all and known them all. She first rose to fame with her breakout role in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Here to chat about her life career, her new book, and one-woman show is none other than actress Ruta Lee. Ruta, welcome to the show.
Wow, what a beautiful introduction. Would you mind doing my memorial service when the time comes?
You just sign me up. I'll give it my best.
Okay.
So, Ruta, you're truly one of the last gems we have left of a certain era of Hollywood. It almost boggles the mind to think of all the things you've seen and the people you've known inside the film and television world. So I was wondering if we could actually start at the beginning and work our way kind of forward. Your family originally migrated to, I think, Quebec and then LA. What was life like growing up in those times with all those kind of changes happening around you?
It was a beautiful period. I mean, I lived in Montreal, Canada. My parents wanted to come into the United States, but the quotas were closed. And why the United States? Because everybody knew that the streets were paved with gold. But Canada was very, very good to my parents. Of course, they had a heavy, heavy work ethic. Being Lithuanian born, I think most Europeans had that heavy work ethic. And so they saved their money and they bought property. And my father was a tailor, my mother a seamstress. They worked very hard. But my mother always felt, and she took the advice of my kindergarten teacher, David, and who said, Mary, talking to my mother, give your child lessons, music lessons, dancing lessons, singing lessons, whatever kind of lessons you can afford to give her, because she's different from the rest of the kids in all of my kindergarten classes. And my mother took her advice and did exactly that. So it would take me to dance classes. And she thought that I was Lithuania's and her answer to Shirley Temple. She didn't know anything about theater, David, which would have been the logical step from New York to Montreal, was what, 300 miles? But she saw movies and she thought, my little girl can do what that pretty little girl does. So Hollywood was set in her brain somehow. And when my father said, let's get out of this cold, cold climate and snow up to our noses every year and move to someplace warm, he was thinking of Hollywood, but he was thinking Hollywood, Florida, not Hollywood, California. But my mother had it in her mind. And when we got a visa and came to California, it was like moving into heaven. California, and especially Los Angeles and Hollywood, was colorful and green and beautiful. And it was a little bit of heaven. Southern California is still a little bit of heaven, but it has too many people now. Too many of you Easterners have come to our way. Of course, Florida is still as beautiful as ever, but I suppose Floridians are thinking we've got too many Northerners as well.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. So they originally chose LA, and have you ever thought of like, well, wow, I mean, let's say they did choose New York. How different, like, I mean, that butterfly effect, right?
Wow, it would have been different, but I think I would have found a way into show business, because I think I was born with the gene that said you have to perform, because I had been performing from the time I could walk. And my mother put me on stage in the church festival events, you know, and whatever. And then I got to be kind of a little bit famous with the Lithuanian communities in Boston and in New York. And sometimes I would be invited to come and perform. So I've never known anything but that. And you have to understand, David, my mother was the furthest thing from a showbiz mom. She wasn't pushy. She was pushy in that she gave me lessons and said, try, go do it, try. That's all she ever did. But she had this very heavy Lithuanian accent, and she was the furthest thing from what we think of as a showbiz mom. So the fact that it happened was truly a blessing, and I thank her, and I thank my father for paying for the lessons, because everything took more than one hand. You might have the hand of God on your shoulder saying, "Go for it, kid," but it helps if your mom and your dad help you along the way too.
Growing up in LA, what was your first memory of meeting someone famous? I mean, did you ever pass, a celebrity at that time in the street or at a store when you were, back in the day before you got into business?
Well, before I got in the business, you have to remember that I grew up in Montreal, Canada, my formative years, and you could not go to the movies until you were 16 years old.
Wow, I did not know that.
Which meant that I didn't see any of those fabulous 30s and 40s and into the 50s films. The 50s I did get to see because I was already here. But I didn't really know who anybody was other than I read fan magazines and stuff. And so I was madly in love with Alan Ladd, and I wrote letters and got a picture back, from a fan picture from Alan Ladd. He was the only star I really knew. But I guess the first great stars that I ever really met and worked with were Gracie Allen and George Burns and Allen. And for all of your viewers who are probably too young to know who Burns and Allen were, they were very big television stars that had grown up in vaudeville and then did movies and were big radio people. And above all, they had the hottest show in television. And I got to work with them, and not only once, but twice. And the nice part, David, was that, I was still, 16 at the time, I think, that I would get invited to some of their cocktail parties that they had, where their Beverly Hills house with the big, beautiful backyard and the pool and lots of stars there. And of course, I tried not to gulp and swallow hard, but they invited me, even though I was a youngster, to join them. And I thought that was a great compliment. And Mr. Burns used to, when I was heading up the Thalians, used to come to my events all the time and pay the ticket to come. I just was so impressed with that, and the fact that they honored me by allowing me to join their beautiful festival events.
Now, the film that really launched you into our hearts and onto our screens was the Western musical Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. If I'm not mistaken, in the most serendipitous of ways, your Lithuanian heritage might have helped you snag that job. How did that role come about for you?
I went to the casting office at MGM. And this was like entering, the hallowed walls. What can I tell you? It was like a cathedral. And speaking of cathedrals, while I went in for the audition, and you had to be able to dance, my mother went and got down on her knees in the church across the street from the casting office and lit many candles and prayed. And I'm never sure whether it was my mother's prayers or my Lithuanian polka ability that got me the job, because I went in and I put on my little tights and whatnot and went into audition for Michael Kidd, who was the choreographer, and of course Stanley Donen, the director. And the piano player did a little ballet music, and I balleted and hopped around and did a few things. And then they did a little jazz kind of thing, And then they said, "Can you do something folksy?" Well, hell, I knew how to do a Lithuanian polka. And so I polka'd up a storm, and thank God I got the job. And like I said, I don't know if it was mom's prayers or my polka or the combination of which, but thank you, Lord, I got the most wonderful experience of my life. It was my first movie, and certainly my first experience of working with some of the best dancers in America. And David, I used to go to the bar every morning, you know, the BARRE, the ballet class, every morning that we did a warm up. And I would watch some of these dancers that were truly the best in America. And I'd say, what in hell am I doing here? How did I get so lucky? But whatever went wrong, a lot of stuff went right. And those days, we worked 6 days a week. We didn't have, this was the early 50s, 53, 54. We didn't have the long weekends that we now have. But just going to work was a pleasure to laugh and scratch and carry on. And Michael Kidd was, I think, one of the greatest people God put on this earth. Not only was he a marvelous talent and a great choreographer, but he also had the wildest self-deprecating sense of humor. He would say, instead of 3 chassés and a piqué turn to the right, he'd say, give me 3 of those or 6 of those scrape-alongs with the corkscrew at the end. That was Michael Kidd.